wherever you are. Hmm.
I don't want to be spotted here.
I don't like swords. Oh yeah, that's why I can't tame them.
I should watch my step around here.
I see you. You!
Where did that come from? What the?
Looks.
Be an economics professor to know that supply equals demand. When there's less caviar to go around, you have to pay above the odds to get your hands on some. But even if sturgeons weren't on the verge of going extinct, high-quality caviar would still be unlikely to come cheap. This elusive species is also extremely complicated to farm. Remember, sturgeons take between 8 and 20 years to be able to produce eggs. That's a lot of time to be waiting around and continually feeding a fish. Knowing when the sturgeons are going to produce their roe isn't an exact science either, especially if you want to be sure the eggs are in perfect condition. There's no magic formula saying delicious eggs will be ready the minute the sturgeon turns 10 years, 2 months, and 5 days old. Instead, farmers must carry out regular autopsies over the course of various years. It's not exactly a cheap and easy job. Of course, only female sturgeons can actually produce eggs, but there's no way to tell males and females apart until they're a few years old. Even then, the only way to differentiate is by carrying out a body scan. Nobody wants to risk forgetting a sturgeon's gender after all the hassle, so 4 tanks are needed. 1 for growing, 1 for breeding, 1 for females, and 1 for males. When the female sturgeons have finally grown their much-anticipated roe, there are 2 ways to extract it. In the past, breeders always killed the sturgeons to get the eggs out. This is still a common practice, but a new method called stripping is beginning to gain popularity, in which sturgeons are injected with hormones to ease out their eggs. Both are expensive processes, considering a sturgeon can live up to 100 years. Killing it when it's reached less than a fifth of its potential lifespan can certainly be seen as wasteful, ethics aside. But paying for hormone injections to get the eggs out is expensive too. So, just to recap, farming sturgeons involves caring for a fish for years until its gender is identified, monitoring female sturgeons constantly for at least 8 years to check the status of their eggs, and ensuring the water is a perfect temperature and the sturgeons are happy, healthy, and stress-free. It's a tall order just to get a few eggs. Their roe is harvested by hand, separated gently from the membrane without bursting the balls, and then it's rinsed in cold water. Typically, the eggs are divided into categories
Ow.
based on their quality. It's believed that fuller, rounder, and lighter colored eggs have the highest quality and the best taste. Finally, this perfect amount of sea salt is mixed in, and the caviar is left to mature for around 4 months. There are some serious costs involved in all this. Years of human labor, sophisticated equipment, and a complicated production process. Now that you've expensive this delicacy really is. The cheapest caviar from Costco costs $31 per ounce. To put that into context, the same quantity of Wagyu steak costs around $7.50. And lobster is an economical $1 per ounce. That already sounds expensive, but realistically, you're likely to be paying a lot more. The price varies widely depending on the species you buy, but expect to pay between $50 to $3,000 per ounce from a respected brand. Beluga caviar, which is generally revered as the best tasting type, costs $350 per ounce on average. Even a cheaper alternative like Siberian caviar costs $75 per ounce. If you come across something cheaper, you might want to check you're buying real caviar. Sometimes eggs from other fish like salmon are sold as caviar, but true caviar always refers to eggs of a sturgeon. Prices can reach unbelievable heights. According to the Guinness World Records, the most expensive caviar in the world comes from the Iranian beluga, sometimes referred to as black gold. A single ounce costs $17,000.
Wow.
It sounds ridiculous, but the Iranian beluga is a rare albino sturgeon that only reaches sexual maturity at the ripe old age of 60. The caviar is said to have a smooth, buttery taste and to be the most delicious in the world, but good luck with ever finding that out firsthand. Naturally, you can't even eat caviar in any old way. If you eat a Jackson, use a spoon made of metal, even silver. It could react with the roe and ruin the taste. Instead, opt for mother of pearl. We all have a mother of pearl spoon lying around in our cupboard somewhere, after all. Alternatively, the traditional way of eating caviar is to place it on the skin between your index finger and thumb, then roll the egg slowly around in your mouth. The eggs are supposed to pop in the mouth and release the flavor. As for serving suggestions, you can either eat caviar on its own or accompany it with neutral foods like potato or cream cheese. So next time you feel like burning some money, you at least know how to do it properly. Sturgeons have been around longer than dinosaurs, so the rich and the famous of the modern day aren't the only ones who've had the chance to indulge in this luxurious food. Various pieces of ancient literature contain references to caviar, and some say it could be one of the oldest delicacies in the world. It's been desired by kings and aristocracy for decades, including the ancient Greeks, the Romans, the Russian Tsars, and in fact, it was Russian Tsars that first pushed the idea of caviar as a luxury item after the French began to import the food from them. But caviar hasn't always been so expensive. Once upon a time in the 19th century, sturgeons were so prolific within North American rivers that roe was thrown away as a waste product onto the beaches and streets. It was often served in saloons for free because owners believed that the salty taste would encourage customers to buy more drinks. So what's changed? Before pollution and the destruction of waterways became an issue, conditions allowed sturgeons to thrive in their environment despite their challenging biology. This meant they could be caught in the wild instead of farmed, which was cheaper. And even though people did go fishing for sturgeons, caviar wasn't internationally sought after to the extent that fishing became an issue. Eventually, the proliferation of sturgeons in the areas with the surplus began to be noticed. Entrepreneurs arrived with an interest in exporting the product, which led to the U.S. producing the majority of the world's caviar in the 19th century. This caused a caviar boom, which eventually led to a shortage in sturgeons and an increase in prices. It's hard to separate the story of caviar from the tale of environmental destruction.
What are you doing, man?
Sturgeons were going strong for
You're fucking civilian.
surviving everything from ice ages to
You just watched me kill like 15 guards, didn't you?
were a valuable commodity.
Dumbass
It goes to show
blind.
that caviar isn't just expensive for being a status symbol. Not only are the species some of the most endangered in the world, farming is extremely labor-intensive and complex. But on a lighter note, there's hope for the future. New advances in aqua farming and production technology are making sturgeon farming more efficient and affordable. For instance, similar schemes around other rivers in the U.S., as well as taking the species off the red list. This is likely to reduce consumer prices, so have hope. Maybe one day you too will be able to taste caviar.
Fuck.
Have you changed your mind? Will you track down and kill Irganos for Sparta?
We made USAA insurance for veterans
I'll
like
do
Mark.
it. If he's this
When a
much
hailstorm
trouble,
hit,
I take it there's a sizable
insurance gets
reward.
done right.
Of course.
Right away.
Just think of how much he'll have on him
What's
with
your
all the
name?
drachmi Athens has given him to thwart our plans.
Being isolated.
I don't want to watch this one.
Any idea where to start looking?
He could be anywhere. Most likely, he's nestled up close to the Athenians. We've sent out a couple of patrols, but they never returned. And we can't spare any more men at this time.
Fortunately, I'm not just any man.
In the spring of 2009, 72-year-old Frank Sanchez was having trouble hearing and also experiencing sent him to get an MRI. Just after the scan started, Prox felt an excruciating pain under his right eye. Meanwhile, the technician stopped the test, saying that they were experiencing interference from the metal in his head. Prox was puzzled. He didn't have any metal in his head, or so he thought. The doctors looked at an older CT scan of Prox's head and were shocked to find something metal the size of a toothpick in the images. While leaving the doctor's office, Prox suddenly coughed up a 1-inch nail. The giant magnet in the MRI machine had dislodged a nail that was stuck in Prox's sinus cavity, sending it down his throat. Doctors thought he might have had the nail stuck in his head for 30 years. The doctors also told Prox when he sniffed up the nail, membrane tissue probably formed around it. The nail might have stayed there forever without the MRI. Although Prox did carpentry, he was bewildered as to how he got a nail up his nose without noticing it. Some very odd and disturbing things have been found in the human body, quite often by medical professionals. Before we go any further, let's discuss what this video is not about. Human beings sometimes have unusual, shall we say, inclinations, which can lead to needing medical assistance to remove items from the lower part of their intestinal system. As many medical professionals who work in an emergency room can tell you, some patients seem to have carefully thought out explanations where somehow they accidentally fell on various objects and those items got stuck. They're visiting the hospital for a rectal foreign body removal because they're unable to remove the item on their own. Frankly, we could spend a whole video discussing this topic, but there are many forum discussions and x-ray pictures online that give veracity to such anecdotes. However, we have provided a short list called From the Internet of items which have been removed during medical exams or, in some cases, emergency surgery. Admittedly, most of these items aren't disturbing as of themselves. It's only when you think where they were found the disturbing factor comes into play. Barbie doll, Buzz Lightyear action figure, candle,
How may I
candy
help
cane,
you?
carrot, cell phone, champagne flute, cucumber, egg, eggplant, flashlight, fork, golf ball, impulse body spray perfume glass bottle, jar of instant coffee, jar of peanut butter, key, knife, light bulb, long-necked glass soda bottle, orange, pen, pepper shaker, ping pong ball, pint glass, plastic bowling pin, potato, salad tongs, salt shaker, screwdriver, shot glass, toothbrush, toy car, turnip, wine cork, zucchini. Now that we've settled that, who feels like sushi? In February of 2012, the Journal of Parasitology published a report on a 63-year-old Korean woman who experienced severe needle-like pain in her mouth while eating a dish of unboiled squid. She immediately spat the squid out, but it was too late. Upon examination by a doctor, 12 squid spermatophores were found to have implanted themselves into the mucous membrane of the woman's tongue, cheek, and gingiva. The parasites were promptly removed along with some of the woman's damaged oral tissues. Apparently, internal organs, including the sperm bag, weren't removed from the squid before meal preparation. A game played by some kids in India almost had deadly consequences for one of the players. In 2012, 12-year-old Anil Barela of Madhya Pradesh was messing around with some friends at a local river. The kids dared one another to swallow live fish. Anil took on the challenge. However, instead of going down Anil's esophagus, the 3.5-inch fish slipped down his windpipe and entered his left lung. Anil began to have trouble breathing and was rushed to the local hospital. The doctors measured the oxygen level in Anil's blood at 80%, 18 points lower than a normal 98%. An X-ray showed Anil's left lung as completely opaque due to the foreign object lodged in it. Doctors performed an emergency bronchoscopy and inserted a cable into Anil's lungs. The camera showed that the fish was still alive. Doctors then performed a 45-minute procedure to remove the fish. Anil made a full recovery. Planning on sticking to vegetables now? In another food-related mishap in the summer of 2010, 75-year-old retired schoolteacher Ron Svendon felt terrible. He was chronically fatigued, had lost his appetite, and frequently had coughing spells. A lifelong smoker, Ron had been battling emphysema for some time, but with the sudden turn in his health, he worried that he had cancer. When Ron was rushed to the hospital with a collapsed lung, his x-rays revealed something unusual. There was a 1.5-inch pea sprout growing in his lung. Much like Anil, doctors thought that while eating peas, one simply went down the wrong pipe and lodged in Ron's lung instead of ending up in his stomach. Ron was relieved to find out that he didn't have cancer and was also amazed. He couldn't remember the last time he had eaten fresh peas either. Apparently, when a pea germinates, it simply needs a warm, wet place to begin to sprout. The pea shoot was removed from Ron's lung by a thoracic surgeon. As a joke, the hospital staff served Ron peas as part of his first meal after the operation. Ron took the joke in stride and ate them. Ron's not the only person to have a plant grow in their lungs. In 2009, Russian doctors operated on 28-year-old Artyom Sidorkin, expecting to remove a tumor, and allegedly found a 2-inch fir seedling sprouting in his lung. Obviously, the results of ingesting non-food items can be very dangerous. 52-year-old Margaret Dahlman of the Netherlands showed up at the hospital complaining of a stomachache. Upon viewing x-rays of her stomach, doctors were dumbfounded to see a large mass of silverware. When going in for surgery, Margaret explained to the doctors that often when she sat down to eat, she couldn't help herself. She would ignore the meal and feast on the cutlery. Instead, Margaret had previously been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which left her with an urge to eat non-food items. The surgery removed 78 spoons and forks from Margaret's
Holy
However,
fuck.
no knives were found. Margaret was never interested in eating those, and she couldn't explain why. Margaret made a full recovery and underwent therapy for her predilection. Margaret's not the only one to suffer this strange affliction, though. Doctors have removed a variety of items that patients have ingested. Common non-food snacks are magnets, coins, and chalk. In 2014, a teenage girl from Kyrgyzstan's bad habit almost ended her life. Though her stomach was swollen, 18-year-old Aperia kept losing weight and was dangerously dehydrated and malnourished. She couldn't keep any food down. Even just drinking water brought about terrible pain. Doctors struggled to diagnose her at first and then figured out the culprit. A massive hairball was blocking her digestive system. Aperi had to be transported to a large hospital in the capital city of Bishkek for an emergency life-saving surgery to remove the 9-pound hairball. The hairball formed due to Aperi's proclivity to chew on and eat her hair and bits and pieces of wool she found on the carpet at home. Apparently, during her surgery, her stomach was so distended and hair began to ooze out as soon as the wall of Aperi's stomach was cut. Despite looking through 50 years of records, the doctor said they were unable to find any cases that involved a hairball this large. You heard correctly. Not other cases involving a hairball, other cases involving a hairball this large. Sometimes after a vacation, you end up feeling more stressed than if you had just stayed at work. In the summer of 2007, Aaron Dallas of Carbondale, Colorado, visited the town of Orange Walk, Belize to assist with the mountain bike race. Upon returning home, he developed large, painful bumps on his head that bled and oozed. His doctor thought they were fly bites that would eventually heal up, but the bumps wouldn't heal. Aaron visited a specialist who thought he might have shingles, a painful rash caused by the varicella zoster virus, the same virus that causes chickenpox. Aaron tried several different creams and ointments, but to no avail. Weeks went by. Aaron started getting flashes of pain that would send him to his knees. It felt like spikes were being driven into his skull. Then the lumps started throbbing, moving. Aaron thought he was going crazy. He could even hear the lumps. Another visit to a doctor brought about the revelation that Aaron's scalp was infested with botfly larvae. Medical staff numbed Aaron's head and extracted 5 fingernail-sized maggots. Most likely, Aaron was bitten by a mosquito carrying botfly eggs. Mosquitoes, stable flies, and other insects are used by female botflies to disseminate their eggs to various hosts. In this case, the host was Aaron. Aaron's not the only person who's brought home an unexpected souvenir after a vacation. During the summer of 2013, the Franklin family of Aliso Viejo, California, went on a camping trip to Spooner's Cove Beach on the central Californian coast. Imagine this. You have an upcoming vacation to a tropical paradise, and in your excitement, you can't resist checking out the best beaches on Google Maps. The swanky hotels, the smooth white sands, the crystal clear waters. It's beautiful. Oh, wait, what's that? You zoomed in to get a better view of the water, but now you can see the outline of what looks like pyramids underwater. That can't be right. How could anyone build a pyramid underwater? Unless they were built so long ago that they've since been submerged. Google Maps and Google Earth are essential tools for travelers or anyone who ever needed to go anywhere, but occasionally people have found more than they were bargaining for. Let's take a look at the strangest things found on Google Maps, ranging from the mildly funny to the downright terrifying. What would you do if you had an annoying neighbor? You know, the type who has karaoke nights on weekdays, mows their lawn at 5 a.m. on a Sunday morning, or uses your garbage can once they run out of space. You might be tempted to show your passive-aggressive side. Their own medicine or send a strongly worded letter to their mailbox. How about mowing the phrase a-hole into their backyard with an arrow pointing toward their house? That's a level of pettiness most people will never reach, but someone did. The proof is right there on Google Maps. Zooming out, you can clearly make out the insult plowed into the farmland nearby. Let's hope that they were Arica City in Chile is the largest Coca-Cola logo in the world. It certainly makes a strange sight on Google for anyone planning a hiking trip, so you might be wondering, why? Coca-Cola constructed the logo to celebrate Coca-Cola's 100th anniversary back in 1986, and it's made out of 70,000 empty soda bottles. It's so beautiful, it's almost poetic. Seeing a corporate logo in the middle of nowhere is strange, but it's not quite insane. Spotting a giant crab in shallow waters by the seaside, however, that's a whole other story. Locals spotted the monster dubbed Crabzilla in the Google Maps footage of Whitstable, England. The monstrous creature appears to be around 50 feet long and lurking in the shallow waters of the skin. At first they assumed crustaceans with only decent drift or a strange thing, but others aren't so sure. One man claims to have seen Crabzilla in person from the corner of his eye when he went crabbing with his...
This year we got creative with our dollars. But with Walmart's low prices, you still know how to split up and keep costs down. Let's begin the year enjoying
sun in the area, but brushed the sighting off as a trick of the light at the time. You might laugh it off, but if I ever visit Whitstable, I'll give jumping in the water a miss. This crab isn't the only supersized animal spotted from Google Maps. In northern Italy, a large pink bunny can be seen splayed across the field with its eyes wide and its mouth open in horror. This time, nobody is claiming it's an actual rabbit. Firstly, it's pink, and secondly, the long, thin legs gives it little resemblance to a real one. But a little bit of research reveals the creature is nothing more than an installation knitted as part of an art collective. You can even climb over the rabbit and step on it if you're some kind of sadist. But despite the innocent intentions, it still looks extremely creepy when seen from Google Maps. But it's not quite as creepy as a figure spotted in a balcony in Marseille, a French city, from Google Maps Street View. You can just about make out a super skinny body with a messy mane of hair, large white eyes, and a demonic look. Sure, it might just be a weird statue, but why would anyone put a scary statue on their balcony? I wouldn't want to walk past that block at night. Even worse, Google ended up blurring the figure out, leading many to believe it's something even more sinister than originally believed. And if that's still not scary enough to give you the chills, try this one. Spray painted on the rooftop of a building in Memphis, you can clearly see the following, written in huge black letters: "Come downtown and play." Nobody from the ground will be able to spot this invitation, but when using Google Maps, it's clear as the light of day. I'm not sure who the message is meant for, but I think I'll be politely declining. This isn't the only mysterious message Google has unwittingly disclosed. In the middle of the Gobi Desert, close to China's space program, you can make out a strange pattern in the desert. The collection of reflective rectangles are visible even from space, and I don't think it was made for decorative purposes. The pattern changes slightly across the images taken at different points in time. At one point, there were circles with jets parked at their center. At another time, there were orange blocks arranged in a circle, and once those blocks were scattered far and wide. There might be a totally innocent explanation, like testing equipment, but others have suggested something more threatening. Some have suggested that the structures are codes the Chinese read from space to practice targets modeled on U.S. cities. And if that wasn't crazy enough, others have suggested that pattern was put there to attract extraterrestrial creatures. Again, totally unbelievable. But no discussion about secret messages could be complete without throwing Scientology into it. It's just about the most mysterious group out there, unless there's a group so secretive that we don't even know about it yet. And
I'm Jimmy Dean, and get yourself a large chunk of that good morning feed.
Do you believe that? You think your life's gonna be amazing? It will be?
That has a powerful impact on people. So powerful.
odd things have been spotted
Let's hope
outside
no one
a
notices me here.
Scientology-owned property in Trementina, New Mexico. In the grounds surrounding the property, Google Maps showed two overlapping circles with diamond shapes in the center. It's a pretty impressive and immaculate site, and its creators obviously put a lot of effort into making it. But what it's meant for is anyone's guess. Someone suggested that it could be a marker for hidden bunkers. If that's true, well, the masterminds at the head of Scientology didn't clearly think through their top-secret plan very well. And to finish off this saga of strange symbols, in an isolated area of Kazakhstan, you can see a huge pentagram. It's estimated to have a diameter of around 1,200 feet wide, and it looks immaculately shaped from Google Maps. Authorities have explained it away as the outline of a heart. But do you really believe it's just one huge coincidence?
Yes, I do.
It's strange, but there's something even creepier about seeing weird things on Google Street View. In a Japanese village called Nagoro, there are around 20 residents, but there are many, many dolls. At first, the idea of a quaint village with lots of dolls sounds kind of cute. But on Google Maps, it's far more horror movie than adorable village. Around every corner, you can see figures with blank white faces slumped around buildings. Makes it even eerier. After the majority of the village's population moved elsewhere for work, one woman decided to make dolls in the likeness of each former resident. I'm not sure why she didn't just do a nice painting instead of making mannequins that looked like they could be used for some kind of black magic ritual, but at least she had good intentions. This isn't the only strange sighting in Japan. As the Google truck was heading through a different town in the Asian country, it pictured a group of guys walking along a path wearing jeans, shirts, and giant pigeon masks. Yeah, you heard me right. Pigeons might not sound that scary, but seeing a group of people walking along with giant pigeon masks is strangely ominous. They also turned to keep watching the camera as it went by. And this time, there's no explanation. That's not it with the scary mask. There's more. By one desert road, the Google truck picked up 4 figures standing wearing weird masks looking directly into the camera lens. One has the mask of a hairy beast, 2 have ghoulish white masks with their hoods up, and another has a strange red mask with a black bowler hat over it. Even if they just decided to act extra creepy to scare people on Google Maps, it still raises a lot of questions about what they were doing in the first place. Who walks around in a scary fancy dress costume in broad daylight? Alright, a word of warning now. Things are about to get dark. These next Google Maps sightings are not for the faint-hearted.
Shut the fuck up.
Red Lake? Well, I hope not, because there's no natural reason why a body of water would be red.
Besides rust, iron.
Baghdad, a bright red lake. And no, it isn't because of some weird trick of the light or a glitch in the system. It's red for exactly the reason we first expected. It's full of blood. No, a serial murderer didn't throw his victims into the lake, but the blood is believed to be runoff from a slaughterhouse nearby. Actually, I'm not sure if that's any better. But an actual human murder victim has also been found on Google Maps. In California, a 14-year-old boy was murdered and left by the road. Google Maps showed the crime scene as police cars and detectives started to gather ready to take the body away. But don't go looking for it, because as you might expect, the family of the boy asked Google to remove the footage. Another eerie sight is a huge shipwreck from an island near India that you can see from your computer screen. A huge ferry sank close to the shore in 2003, but nobody has been able to retrieve the ship or the bodies due to the dangerous tribes on the island who have been known to murder fishermen in the past. It's pretty chilling to see the outline of a ship so clearly through the pristine water. And just when you thought things couldn't get crazier, it's now time to start talking about the supernatural and the conspiracy theories. In South Sudan, eagle-eyed Google Maps users found a perfectly circular lake amid the thick jungles of the area. It seems incredible that a lake could have such a perfectly smooth circular shape. But no, it's not man-made. The lake even has a floating layer of foliage. Flat earthers have latched onto this as proof that the Earth is a perfect circle, and this lake in Sudan is the world's flood pool. I've been thinking about this a while, and I'm not sure if that makes any sense, but moving on. Another phenomenon spotted in Sudan is what looks like the formation of human lips in the desert. It's strange for 2 reasons. The lips are a redder color of sand than the rest of the desert. Their outline is made up of what looks like black dots. In reality, it's probably just a hill formation, but it sure looks strange from up above. Naturally, it sparked some more alien theories, with some conspiracy theorists believing the lips are a vessel for extraterrestrial objects. This isn't the only secret that Google Maps may have uncovered. At one point, Google Maps displayed an island called Sandy Island near New Caledonia in the Pacific Ocean. There was just one problem. Sandy Island doesn't actually exist. Its supposed location is all ocean with no land. The island was first mentioned by a whaling ship and was recorded on maps from as early as 1876, but since then, its inclusion on major maps has been inconsistent. After appearing in Google Maps, it was quickly removed. But the mysterious nature of Sandy Island has made many people conjure up strange theories. Some believe it's a magical island that only shows itself to the chosen ones. Remember those underwater pyramids mentioned at the start of the video? They were spotted by a Google Maps user in an ocean by the Bahamas. Once again, many people assumed they've proved the existence of aliens, Atlantis, or even crazier things. If you're versed in Conspiracy Theories 101, you'll know that the reason ancient civilizations like the Egyptians were able to build impressive structures like the pyramids in the first place was because aliens taught them how. So for structures to have been built so long ago that they've now been submerged underwater, it seems the alien theory must be true, right? If you want a more reasonable explanation, try this one. The pyramids are actually part of the lost city of Atlantis. I mean, no one has proved it isn't true yet. And finally, the most insane thing of all. On Google Maps Mars, some users found what looks like a secret base. In the midst of many red deserts covering the planet, you can see a selection of what looks like solar panels and white buildings. What could they be? A secret station of Martians? Elon Musk's secret second home? Nope, the answer is even crazier. A Google data center on Mars, and they've been keeping it a secret all this time. Unfortunately, this supposed base turned out to be an April Fool's joke. In fact, some eagle-eyed Googlers figured out the pictures were actually taken from the movie Martian. So don't believe everything you see on Google Maps, or at least everything a conspiracy theorist tells you. But some of these mysteries would raise the eyebrows of even the most hardline skeptic. To see more crazy geographical discoveries, check out our videos about a missing lost continent and the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle. As a writer for the infographic show, a lot of my work is pretty research heavy. From finding out the properties of rare poisons to the weapons favored by the soldiers and the Turkish military. So when I got a new assignment from my infographic show overlords that said, play GTA 5 online, I was elated. As someone who's already a big fan of the hit franchise that essentially lets you roleplay as a complete sociopath in a lovingly detailed cityscape, this felt like the perfect assignment for me. And that's when I saw the fine print, and my heart dropped. Play GTA 5 online as a normal person. That means no murder, no theft, no crazy missions, and honestly, no crimes more severe than tearing out the tag of your mattress. Seems easy enough, right? Wrong. Anyone who's played GTA 5 online will tell you it's basically like The Purge, complete with heavy weaponry and goofy costumes. If you're not in a crew, which as a normal person I couldn't be, it's basically a kill or be killed battle royale free-for-all. Still, orders are orders, so I began my mundane GTA 5 online journey in the simplest way I could imagine, getting myself a makeover. In the beautiful city of Los Santos, appearance is everything, so it made sense to make my first port of call getting myself a fashionable new outfit. First order of business is Ponsonby's, GTA's resident upmarket clothing store, for a tasteful designer shirt and slacks combo. The uniform of middle-class white denim everywhere. As I select my clothes, I notice other players speeding by outside in what looks like neon-colored Ferraris, exchanging gunfire. Normally, I'd run out guns blazing and join in, but no, thanks to my infographics bosses, I'm playing the goody-two-shoes version of this game. I'm not even carrying any loaded weapons on my person, just for extra realism. Thankfully, the two yahoos outside are too busy blasting each other to notice me. With my threads looking fine, I decided all I need now to make that perfect Los Santos first impression is a killer haircut. And I don't go anywhere for this haircut. I go to the high-end Bob Moulet salon up at Rockford Hills. The best place for a fancy schmancy new do. When I have a style that I think best suits my charming personality, I'm finally ready to venture out and take on the world. But as soon as I step out onto the streets of Rockford Hills, I'm greeted by a man in his underwear wearing a rubber monkey mask. His gamer tag reads Noob Slayer 3000, and of course he's carrying a claw hammer. Normally I'd pull out my old weapon and engage, but not this time, Chief. I turn and prepare to start button mashing, hoping I'll at least be able to lose to Monkey Man, but no such luck. Before I even really get a chance to start running, Monkey Man was on my rear. Before I could even engage my headset to tell him I was a writer for the infographic show, researching for a video, he'd already brained me with the hammer. The familiar wasted sign flashed up on the screen, and I knew I was in for a rough session. Still, in the world of GTA 5, it takes more than death to keep a good writer down. As soon as I respawned, I made a mental note to personally track down Noob Slayer next time I was playing this for real, and continued with my research. As the name suggests, driving is a huge part of the game, but seeing as I can't steal a car like any other player would, I invested in a modest Shafter sedan. It definitely isn't the fastest car in the game, but it handles well, and without a criminal empire behind me, I can't exactly afford
Raise the sail!
to get on a new ride. Of course, as I drive around scenic Los Santos, I obey all traffic laws. Never once do I speed, merge illegally, or even run a red light. It seems that things are almost stoplight in downtown LS watching the pedestrians cross in front of me when I suddenly hear a heavy rumbling coming from behind. This can't be good. Just as I was swiveling my camera to see what all the commotion was about, I saw a tank approaching from behind me. This time, driven by Boyo Mama 69X420. Great. Wonderful. Even if I was playing offensively, a tank would be a challenge. But playing as a normal person, I was basically a city duck. If only those traffic lights could go green in the nick of time, I might be able to stage a cunning last-minute escape. But no luck. I let out a sigh and rubbed my eyes as Boyo Mama's tank fired an explosive round that blew myself and several of the cars and pedestrians around me to Kingdom Come. Yep, you guessed it, wasted. Once I'd revived and collected the insurance payout from my devastated personal vehicle, I decided I needed some time away from the violence-filled urban sprawl where I'd just been blown to smithereens. Instead, I wanted to take a relaxing drive up into the slopes of Mount Chiliad, the tallest mountain in Los Santos. Hopefully there'd be a lower population density and fewer fellow players who'd be eager to bust a cab or two into my behind. Scenic natural environments and not being murdered in cold blood, that's a win-win situation in my book, buddy. It was creeping into dusk as I drove up the winding roads of Mount Chiliad in my newly unexploded Schafter sedan. The sky was beautiful. The world around me was quiet and serene. It was just me and far mountain. Which is why when I heard the sudden roar of jet engines up above me, I knew something was horribly wrong. Suddenly I was skidding from side to side as the roundabout was lit up by a
leaving the helm!
All in all, my evasive maneuver served me pretty well, as my hardy sedan only took some minor shots from the P-996 laser fighter jet that was chasing me down. I was naively hopeful enough that I thought I might even survive this tense encounter when the flying turd, whose gamer tag, by the way, was Swag Killer, let off an air-to-surface missile. The resulting explosion lit up the mountain, and what was left of me could probably be scraped off the mountain road with a toothbrush. Once again, wasted. All for trying to take a nice drive through nature. Constantly getting murdered for just trying to live a normal life was really starting to run up my medical bills. And because we can't even escape capitalism in video games, I needed at least something that resembled a real-life job. Problem was, outside of playing the real estate mogul, which I didn't have the money for, all the standard money-making methods in GTA 5 Online are criminal in nature. But I'm not a writer at the infographic show for nothing. Not having a vanilla job just opened up an opportunity to get creative, and by creative, I mean I started offering a taxi service. Is this an official feature of GTA 5 Online? No, but a number of players had taken up the habit of using a local garage to mod their car yellow and add a taxi service insignia, and with that, I began pulling up alongside fellow players in the game, honking my horn and offering them a ride. They would then either hop on mic or send me a text message telling me exactly where they wanted to go. It was honest, normal work for an honest, normal GTA 5 player. Well, it was, until two players dressed as clowns decided to take a ride in the back of my makeshift cab. In my heart, part of me knew this was going to end badly, but my average Joe character probably wouldn't. That's why I obliged them in their request to be driven out to sandy shores in the dead of night, where they were headed for unknown reasons. A ride's a ride, so I took them there, and aside from a few moments where they leaned out the windows and blasted a few pedestrians with micro SMGs, it was a pretty chill journey. Until, of course, we reached our destination. At that point, the two clowns exited the vehicle. Rather than thanking me, one of them pulled me out of the driver's seat and punched me in the face with brass knuckles. Before I could even turn my headset on to give the duo a few choice words that I can't repeat here if we want to keep the monetization on the video, it was already over. The other clown had thrown down a Molotov cocktail and set me ablaze. They then detonated my humble taxi with a grenade as I burned to death in the sand. Wasted. And that was my last day in the taxi business too. This might have been Grand Theft Auto, but I wasn't feeling too grand. Theft was prohibited, and I was getting really sick of automobiles. That's why I ditched the car entirely, and I decided to instead partake in some wholesome, normal physical activities. The coastal city of Los Santos has a gorgeous Vespucci beach, where you can exercise, sunbathe, and even go for a swim. I decided to do just that, and I explored the wonderful detail of the underwater environments just off the coast. There were jet skis zipping around above the water, but they weren't paying me any mind until one stopped, and the driver jumped down into the water. I figured maybe they just wanted to explore too, until they started making a beeline toward me, swimming straight down to my location, holding a knife. I was already running a little short on air, so I had nowhere to go but up, straight into the path of their slashing blade, turning me into Los Santos sushi. I was wasted before I even hit the surface. So the sea proved to be a hazardous
I've been looking for you.
I
saw your
instead
message.
revisit my old
What's
enemy,
up?
Mount Chiliad,
My
hoping to
brother
hike
is a
up to its
soldier at the
highest
front.
peak and take a selfie
I'm no
to commemorate the moment. It was
Made a
indeed a
sword for
challenging
him to
hike,
win
making
glory
my way
for
up
our
the
family.
mountain's treacherous
That's a
slopes,
noble thought.
constantly paranoid that another player would
But
sneak
I
up
don't
and
know what
slaughter
to
me
do.
again. But thankfully,
get the
nobody
sword
was
to him
even
for all
nearby
the
on the
bandits
map
in
when
the
I reached
path.
the peak. It was
I
a
feel
glorious
like I
sense of
failed
victory
you.
for my little GTA 5 online normal guy, and the victory selfie would be even sweeter. So I turned on
This
the
is where you
camera and
asked me to
framed up
take
the
care
shot
of
with
them.
a nice big
All the
smile.
bandits
Problem
must
was I
die.
wasn't the only person
We have
breaking
an
up the
agreement.
shot. Far away down the mountain, too
I'll
far for me
handle
to
this.
even really register them
Thank
as
you,
a threat.
mercenary.
Another player was
Leave it to
locking
me.
my head in the sights of their heavy sniper rifle. Right as I was about to take my shot, they took theirs, and my head was practically blown off my shoulders before I even had a chance to take a picture. Wasted. After getting wasted again and again and again, it was time to get, well, wasted. Seeing as I died more times than Sean Bean, I felt like this normal guy had earned himself a drink. So I gone down to the nearest GTA Online script club to admire some of the local sights, and most importantly, get hammered with one shot after another shot after another shot. By the time I felt like my character had had enough, he was stumbling out of the bar, and the world was all blurry around him,
Megaris,
camera shaking.
the
I hadn't
city
even
of
had a drop
pigs.
in real life when I saw a floating shape in the distance. For a second, I thought I must have been seeing things a little crazy as what appeared to be a flying DeLorean car
Best
was
stay out of
speeding
sight.
toward me through the shaking sky. And I accidentally drifted back to the future. No, as it turns out, it was just another player. Once again, the dreaded Noob Slayer 3000 driving a Deluxo flying car straight toward me. I was a little too drunk to even attempt running away, so when one of the car's advanced homing missiles swooped in and blew me straight to hell, it honestly felt almost merciful. Wasted. So that concluded my journey of trying to live a normal life in GTA 5 Online. What have we learned from our little adventure? Well, in this irritated infographic show writer's humble opinion, GTA 5 Online is a hell of a lot more fun when you can shoot back. Check out What If You Woke Up as an NPC in GTA 5 Online for more wacky adventures in Los Santos, and why the most expensive video game ever will never be released for more insane video game facts. As you look at the results in front of you, you start to wonder if you're going insane. Have you just made some silly mistake that's given you totally misleading test results? Because what you appear to have discovered makes no sense at all. A concentration of uranium this high? It can't be possible. You work at a uranium enrichment plant in France. You deal with uranium day in and day out, and you know just about everything there is to know. Yet you've never seen anything quite like this. Your task for the day had been to carry out a series of checks on a natural uranium sample. Nothing out of the ordinary for someone who works in a uranium plant. The only reason you were carrying out the checks was a slight isotopic anomaly in some samples from Gabon, and nobody suspected that there wouldn't be a simple explanation. But here you are, looking at a result that contradicts everything you thought you knew. These results suggest that the uranium was involved in a nuclear reaction. But how could a nuclear reaction have happened in a remote mine in Gabon? Maybe it was a contamination. But if not, it could mean a nuclear reaction had happened naturally. That would rewrite history and change everything you thought you knew. See, a nuclear reaction is no small matter. Once upon a time, scientists weren't even sure if such a thing was possible. You remember when the first nuclear reactor was created back in the 1940s? It was man-made, built by a physicist called Enrico Fermi. And you were just a child at the time, so you don't remember the events well, but the whole world was in awe at the groundbreaking discovery. Later, as you went on to study physics, you'd realize what a monumental achievement it was. You learned how Fermi had just been starting his career in physics when scientists discovered nuclear fission for the first time, and he began to ponder the implications. Maybe this mysterious process could be used on purpose by humans to create energy. To investigate this theory, he carried out some experiments with uranium, an essential component of nuclear fission. All this would eventually lead to setting up the first nuclear chain reaction. At least, so he thought at the
I should
time.
try to stay
In
out of sight.
1942, Fermi and his team assembled a reactor built of 45,000 graphite blocks and wood, materials that acted as the reactor's neutron moderator. A powder made of uranium oxide was poured into the blocks to set the right conditions for a reaction. And finally, a control rod made of cadmium was used to control the reaction by absorbing neutrons and acting as a kind of brake. The reactor was named Chicago Pile 1. One day later that year, Fermi attempted the experiment. The trick was basically to get the level of criticality needed to guarantee self-sustaining nuclear fission. Nuclear fission happens when an atom splits in two parts and releases energy. Atoms contain protons and neutrons in their central nucleus. But when the nucleus splits during fission, its resulting pieces have less combined mass than the original nucleus. This means mass becomes nuclear energy, which has precise measures had to line up perfectly. No wonder the idea of this happening in nature seemed impossible, but the experiment was successful. It was monumental within your discipline and for all of humankind. Fermi proved nuclear energy could generate power, and his model was used as a baseline for large-scale nuclear reactors built afterwards. Everyone thought it was the first nuclear reactor ever, but how could something that was discovered as recently as 1942 have happened without the intervention of man so long ago? Yet this is what the results are indicating. Your colleagues are incredulous when you tell them, but together you carefully check over the results and consider the possibilities. It was possible the data could be misleading due to contamination, but already your mind was swimming. What if this genuinely had happened naturally? How could it have taken place?
Have
How
you killed
old
them?
would the
I
reactor
took care
have
of
to be?
them.
It was
Every
also
last
crazy.
one.
You hadn't even
I'm a
been
man of
looking
my
for a
word.
nuclear reactor in the
Here's
first place,
your
but you definitely got more than you bargained for. You
I
realized
have a
that there
good
was
crew,
more of the
but we're
isotope
missing
uranium
someone with your
235 than there
talents.
should be. More
I
than
want
there
you
has
on
been in
board
any
with
other
us.
uranium
What do you
sample
say?
ever. Natural
I
uranium,
always
which is
wanted to
taken from the
succeed,
crust of the Earth or
but it
rocks
seemed
from
like
the
the
moon,
gods
is
set
made
me
up
on a
of only
different path.
around
Now
0.720%
will finally be
of
my
uranium
chance to see
235.
the world.
But rock and Oklo only contains 0.717%. It might sound like a pretty minor difference, but it's actually incredibly significant. The concentration of uranium-235 was supposed to be so constant
Well,
from all
you're not gonna get that
the
chance.
solar system that it's complicated to calibrate devices. How come this piece of uranium was breaking an established natural law? And as well as contradicting science, the finding meant that this uranium was the high-grade missile sort. And since you needed to be sure that none of the uranium handled is used for weapons purposes, you needed to carry out an investigation. It's really weird, but whatever. You assumed it had to be some kind of artificial contamination. Maybe this uranium had been contaminated with depleted uranium, which has less U-235 at some point during the production process. This was sounding slightly more likely. You decided to take a look. First, you traced the process of sourcing uranium back in time. It had been through a long journey to get to where you are now. From the Oklahoma
Anything a mercenary can do for you, stranger?
Is violence the natural state of humanity? Is there such a thing as peace? Or are there simply moments between attacks?
I prefer fighting to thinking about fighting. Get to the point.
Oh, of course. The strong leader dies and the weaker, meaner leaders rise up. The commander of the nearby camp has become violent and tyrannical. He and his soldiers should learn a truth or two.
So you're asking me to send all the Athenians to the underworld?
All the soldiers must die. Do we have a deal?
I'm the one for the job.
I knew you'd see a reason.
Get it.
Another theory was that a bomb had exploded in Africa without anyone noticing, since bombs caused the Yet the readings were found to be localized to be more in the mine, so you had to dismiss that idea too. The mystery grew, unless a natural reaction really had happened. So you looked for fission products, the isotopes of elements created during nuclear fission. Sure enough, there they were. The uranium had somehow become a natural reactor that, when critical, burned up a portion of its nuclear fuel and then shut down. There was only one question left. How? You weren't just assuming that any nuclear reaction had to be man-made because you were a stubborn scientist or a fanboy at first. There were good scientific principles to suggest why natural nuclear reactors should be impossible. So to answer the question of how, we need to take a deep dive into the science. There's been plenty of talk of uranium-235, but what even is it? Well, uranium has two isotopes, U-235 and U-238. Uranium ore should be everywhere, but that's not to say the ratio has always been the same. Uranium decays over time, and both the isotopes decay differently. Now, U-235 has a shorter half-life, which means its concentration within uranium decreases with time. There was a higher concentration in the past than there is now. For U-238, the opposite is true. Its concentration increases over time. So what? Well, this alone doesn't prove that a natural nuclear reaction took place, but it does give a clue. The ratio of U-238 to U-235 that exists now doesn't make it possible for a nuclear reaction to take place. But if the ratio were different, it could be possible. And since the isotopes decay at different rates, once upon a time the ratio would have been different, and it could have been optimal. 2 billion years ago, the ratio of uranium-235 to U-238 was about 3%.
This area will be well defended.
It's perfect for a light water-moderated chain reaction. So the first hint was that the reaction happened a very, very long time ago. And this wasn't the only thing. Other conditions for a
perhaps the most important part of all. For a nuclear chain reaction to happen and be self-sustaining, it needs a moderator, and water fits the mold perfectly. Water slows down neutrons and makes controlled fission possible. Without this, the atoms wouldn't have split. But it can't just be any kind of water. There's both heavy water and so-called ordinary water in the world. Heavy water contains a type of hydrogen called helium, whereas ordinary water is made of protein, and it all produces properties that allow the moderate. Nowadays, heavy water is used for a nuclear reaction to happen because the ratio of U-235 and U-238,000 uranium. But remember how the ratio changes over time? Well, there will be more U-235, which means more water can be generated in energy. Basically, every single condition for a nuclear reactor was met. Theoretically, a fission reaction would have triggered an uranium deposit all those years ago. But at the same time, it's impossible to prove it. This couldn't go to the there was no guarantee that they would now as they had been all that time ago. But those years ago, there was so for that large time, especially circulating water like that fossilized
Job well done.
It seemed like a long shot, but it was worth a go. After investigating the mine, this is exactly what we found. All the conditions had been met. They were still in place now, and there was a fossilized nuclear reactor. Incredible. We found a footprint of fission products in the ore that was there too. So, what did all this mean? What had happened in the Oklo mine? Picking apart the evidence, you were able to paint a fuller picture. It seemed like the fission reaction had continued off and on for hundreds of thousands of years, sustaining itself fully throughout the time. Then, eventually, it stopped reacting and shut down. This probably happened around 1 billion years ago. To put that into context, humans have only been around for about 200,000 years. Jellyfish, one of the world's oldest species, have been around for maybe 500 million years. The Earth itself is only estimated to be 4 or 5 billion years old. Basically, this nuclear reactor is only half as old as the very planet we live on, and it's hard to wrap your head around. But why did this happen in Oklo, and has it ever happened anywhere else? Oklo may have had the right conditions, but it's hard to know why the uranium deposit was critical there. One reason could be the lack of elements in the mine that prevent a reaction taking place, like lead and cadmium. Another possible is its remoteness. While being remote doesn't make a nuclear reaction more likely, it does improve the likelihood of the byproduct being preserved. As for whether there have been other natural reactors, there's no way to be certain. 16 sites of nuclear fission reactions have been found in Oklo, but none elsewhere in the world. It's not enough to say that there aren't anymore, but it's pretty unlikely that conditions would be remote enough to have preserved the evidence anywhere else.
Please, for the love of God, can anybody get the fucking stream?
I took care of it. Every last one.
You do fine work, Marshal. Take this as thanks.
All in a day's work.
The Earth goes through periodic cooling periods known as ice ages, with the last ice age ending a few tens of thousands of years ago. Today, we're resting comfortably in a mild climate period, which means moderate winters in most places around the world, and year-long sunshine in California. But today, we're also capable of changing the environment artificially, and are already doing so via uncontrolled release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which are warming the planet. But with thousands of nuclear weapons around the world primed to detonate, that warming trend could very quickly reverse and send us straight into a man-made ice age. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Infographic Show. Today we're asking, how can we survive a nuclear winter? The legendary astrophysicist Carl Sagan co-authored a paper in the 1980s called Climate and Smoke, an appraisal of nuclear winter. In this earth-shattering essay, Sagan and his partner James B. Pollock studied the physical effects a nuclear war would have on our planet, and discovered that not only would such a war devastate nations, but it could potentially disrupt the global climate. By vaporizing debris and filling the atmosphere with ash, soot, and aerosols, a nuclear war would result in global dust clouds that would block the sun's rays for years, preventing the sun's energy from reaching the surface of the planet. This would trigger a cascade cooling effect, which would plummet global temperatures by as much as 22 degrees Celsius, turning sunny California into something more akin to blustery Seattle. The world would enter an artificial ice age. Though recent studies have shown that Sagan and Pollock's original estimates may have been a bit overzealous, our environment is incredibly fragile, and even a 10-degree drop in temperature would have dramatic repercussions. Not only would lower temperatures severely shorten growing seasons for plants, but all of
Shit. I have so much HP now. Only these guys didn't level up with me.
Warm water heated by the sun and the equator to northern Europe, which in turn is why Europe is so far north, yet enjoys mild weather and warm summers. With a decline in sunshine, this current will completely shut down. And without warm water being circulated around Europe and into the Mediterranean, Europe would begin to see weather close to what is common in Canada today. Spain and France.
Why would I fight when I could just hide?
Destinations would be a thing of the past, and in fact, pretty much the entire Mediterranean would be far too chilly to go for a swim in. But it wouldn't be just sunny beaches that are a casualty of the nuclear war.
Tyson Anytizers chicken. The perfect snack for intermission. Keep it real. Keep it Tyson Anytizers.
With moderate to severe ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, your plans can change at any time. Your head wants to do one thing, but your gut says, not today. GI-focused Entyvio is made for this. Entyvio acts specifically in the GI tract to prevent an excess of white blood cells from entering and causing damaging inflammation. Entyvio has helped many patients achieve long-term relief and remission. It may help you too. Infusion and serious allergic reactions can happen during or after treatment. Entyvio may increase risk of infection, which can be serious. Although unlikely, a risk of PML, a rare, serious, potentially fatal brain infection, cannot be ruled out. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, experience frequent infections, or have flu-like symptoms or sores. Liver problems can occur with Entyvio. If other treatments haven't worked well enough, ask your doctor about Entyvio. If you're experiencing financial hardship during these trying times, Takeda may be able to help.
The North Atlantic Drift also helps bring favorable weather for growing crops to Europe, and without it, Europe would experience a catastrophic crop collapse during what little growing season may be left due to all the dust in the atmosphere. The east coast of the U.S. is also dependent on ocean currents for its mild weather, and a global cooling that reached the equator would shut down the Gulf Stream along the U.S.'s shores. Originating in the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf Stream circulates warm water up along the east coast of the U.S. and into southern Canada, helping bring mild temperatures to the area during spring and summer. Chilly temperatures would be hard enough to deal with, but all of that blocked sunlight would also shorten growing seasons for crops. With much reduced sunlight, humanity would be unable to grow enough crops to feed everyone alive today, and mass starvation would ensue. If current stockpiles of non-perishable goods could be evenly and fairly distributed, a doubtful circumstance in a post-apocalyptic world, it's possible that the majority of the population could survive a short-term nuclear winter. The length and severity of a nuclear winter would ultimately depend on the amount of weapons exchanged between combatants, but even a small regional exchange of just a few hundred low-yield weapons is estimated to plunge the Earth into a 10-year nuclear winter. Even with today's large stockpiles of non-perishable goods, there's simply no way the majority of the population could survive a decade of famine. Those that do survive, however, would face crippling vitamin and mineral deficiencies, leading to disease and illness, which would further decimate humanity's plunging population. In the midst of a nuclear winter, you'd probably be delighted to see a few shafts of sunlight through clouds full of choking dust. But beware, that sunlight could be lethal. That's because a nuclear war would destroy the ozone layer, meaning there would be little protection from the sun's harmful UV rays. Unless you slather up in the most powerful sunscreen you can find, basking in the sun for too long will result in severe sunburns and cancers. Your eyes would be especially sensitive to that intense UV radiation, and it would be vital to wear goggles or sunglasses with UV filters in order to keep yourself from going blind. Because UV rays can damage your eyes without you feeling it, your vision could become severely impaired without you realizing what is happening until it's too late. A nuclear winter would be clearly a nightmare scenario, but it might be survivable. After all, your ancestors already did. That's right, we're the descendants of a very small group of humans who have survived this ancient nuclear winter, 75,000 years ago. A supervolcano in modern-day Lake Toba, Sumatra, erupted with a fury equivalent to thousands of nuclear bombs, and was 100 times greater than the 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora, which resulted in
1916's year without a summer, injecting 6 billion tons of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. The eruption dropped global temperatures by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius for 3 years, and further cooling lasting decades. Though scientists differ on the severity of the cooling, the Toba supereruption is widely credited with creating a genetic bottleneck in human evolution, during which the human population dropped suddenly to a surviving population of only about 3,000 to 10,000 individuals. So though a nuclear winter sounds bad, know that you are already genetically predisposed to survive one. But how exactly can you help your odds of survival?
I should be extra careful in this
You
area.
want to tackle your greatest threat, the cold. Insulating your home will be critical to keeping warm. And if you don't know anything about insulation or construction, now is a good time to learn at least how to use spray foam insulation materials. Fuel supplies will run critically low very quickly, and even trees may become scarce if there's not enough sunlight for them to grow. You're going to want to keep out as much cold as possible, while keeping in as much heat as you can at all times. Secondly, you'll want to secure a fresh water drinking supply. A nuclear winter may paradoxically not necessarily result in snow, as disrupted weather patterns and a lack of evaporation and thus precipitation may turn the world into a frozen desert. Even if there is snow where you are though, it's likely to be highly contaminated with radioactive or other particles from the trillions of tons of debris ejected into the atmosphere by the nuclear bombs. Emergency water filters will be critical for your health, as well as water purification tablets and possibly iodine pills for radiation poisoning. It goes without saying that intense radiation will also be a hazard, but you are in fact not very likely to be irradiated in a nuclear winter. You stay out of ground zero blast zones. That's because a nuclear weapon is designed to airburst or explode several hundred to a few thousand meters above its target. Because if the bomb were to explode on the ground, the blast wave would be mitigated by terrain and buildings, severely limiting the explosive potential of a nuclear bomb. High up in the air, though, a blast wave can spread for several miles without being dampened by the hilly terrain or dense clusters of buildings. An airburst detonation will also ensure that the majority of the radiation from an explosion will actually be projected upwards into space, while a ground burst detonation will irradiate millions of tons of soil, which will be carried by the wind. So stay out of large craters, and you shouldn't be turning into a Fallout-style ghoul anytime soon. Your third concern will be to secure a food supply. This may be trickier than finding water or keeping warm, as even perishable goods will quickly become scarce. And with most nuclear weapons aimed at major manufacturing and distribution centers, it's unlikely you'll find much that will
Numbers feel like yours right out of the box. Gmail and your files are magically there.
Be safe to scavenge without irradiating yourself. Hunting and fishing may seem a viable alternative, but the world operates on a complex food web with organisms feeding on each other. And at the very bottom of that food web sits the sun. It doesn't matter if you're a polar bear or an Antarctic leopard seal. The food you eat inevitably eats food that in turn eats something that grows thanks to the sun. Polar bears, for instance, hunt seals, who in turn hunt small fish, who in turn feed on krill and plankton, which depend on the sun. Global food chains will collapse inevitably, but with a severely diminished population, you just might be able to eke out enough hunting and fishing to survive. If not, well, there's always billions of freshly barbecued human bodies lying around. A nuclear winter would decimate civilization and possibly drive humanity to the brink of extinction. But this isn't a threat we haven't faced before. As the Toba supervolcano showed us, we as a species have what it takes to survive and thrive in the face of any disaster. And with these catastrophes acting as genetic bottlenecks, our children will be even more capable of surviving whatever the future throws at them. My name is Sasha Yuchenko, and I'd like to tell you the story of how I survived one of the worst man-made disasters the world has ever seen. On April 25th, 1986, I was working at the heart of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant when the number 4 nuclear reactor exploded. The blast was huge in itself, and one of my colleagues was pretty much vaporized instantly. What happened after that has become one of the world's worst real-life horror stories. But let me start from the beginning. It was evening at the plant where I worked, which was located near the town of Pripyat in northern Ukraine. The sky was a radiant blue. It was warm, and when my colleagues and I clocked in for our night shift at the plant, we were in good spirits. I remember the conversation was all about what we were going to do for the May Day holidays, and little did we know the near future would be very different from how we imagined it would be.
My wife, Natasha, was at home with my 2-year-old. I was 24 at the time, with a new family and everything to look forward to. That night, we were told that we were going to have to run a test on reactor number 4. This didn't go down well with a lot of guys because we weren't really sure how to do it. We had no choice, though. A command is a command. We argued about the right power level we should start the test at, and little did we know that there was a design flaw in the reactor. This would prove to be what you might call a fatal design flaw. What we were basically testing was a simulation of an electrical power outage. You can probably guess that such a thing, if it were to happen, would be very dangerous. But if there was an outage, the generators would kick on. The problem was this would take about a minute to gain full power. And you just don't have a minute, because the water that's pumped in the reactor to keep it cool would not get pumped, and too much heat would be generated. So the theory was that the electricity could be taken from the rotational energy of the steam turbine. This would in theory power the cooling pumps for that minute. So to do the test, we had to simulate this power loss and
Keep a
see if
sharp
this theory
watch
worked.
here.
We tried this twice before, but both times the tests failed. Third time lucky is not exactly how things turned out. So we dropped the power levels. That didn't go well, and suddenly the reactor became dangerously unstable. We also ignored, and were told to ignore, some of the vital safety mechanisms. We knew something was wrong, but we were told to go ahead and keep testing. We removed something called control rods so that we could get back to power, but that didn't turn out well either. It was also against safety procedures. Those rods are like a failsafe. They prevent the reactor from generating too much power. Power then began to rise, and then rise dramatically. We weren't sure what was happening. In the reactor, steam was building up. You could say what we had then was a pressure cooker of enormous proportions. We knew then we had an emergency on our hands. We pushed the scram button, which was the emergency shutdown. We then reinserted the control rods, but they jammed. What we didn't know is that the graphite tips on those rods caused more power to surge. At 1:23 and 45 seconds a.m., the pressure cooker then blew. The 1,000-ton roof was blown right off, and a fireball blasted into the sky. The air was filled with dust. Pieces of graphite were flung everywhere. Radiation spilled into the atmosphere. It was hell on Earth, in a literal sense. We were all shocked. The boom was so big that a war had happened. The walls shuddered. The whole place felt so unstable. Trust me, I'm a huge man, and I'm not afraid of much, but at that point, I felt tiny. At the first, it felt terrible. I then went looking for my buddy because he must have been closest to me. It was dark, and the water was dust was everywhere.
Fuck!
His ear was a hissing sound. Then too near the pumps, he was dead. I saw the roof had been blown off, and in the night sky I could see the stars. And then I saw something that looked quite wonderful, ethereal, like God shining down on us. It was a beam of light. That beam was something more malign than I was aware of. It was radiation, and that radiation would kill a lot of people. I then went with some colleagues to the reactor hall, but the heavy door was jammed. As I said, I'm a big man. Some people say a bear of a man. I managed to get the door open while my friends went inside the hall and tried to understand just how much damage had been caused.